Chosen one, there is something you need to hear clearly before this message goes any further. It is over, not paused, not delayed again. Over. I want you to sit with that word for a moment, because your heart has likely been trained to distrust it. You have heard it's over before, only to watch the same struggle circle back weeks later wearing a different face. This is not that. What God is closing right now is not being closed halfway, the way seasons sometimes seem to end and then quietly reopen. This one is being sealed. You have carried pain in places no one else saw. You have held yourself together in rooms where falling apart would have made more sense than standing. And through all of it, even when it felt like heaven had gone quiet, God was not absent. He was doing the kind of work that does not announce itself until it is finished. Maybe you have tried to explain this feeling to people who could not quite understand it. The sense that something in you has shifted, even though nothing on the outside looks obviously different yet. That gap between what you feel internally and what is visible externally is not confusion. It is simply timing. What God finishes in the spirit is often complete long before it becomes visible in circumstance. Isaiah 43 verse 18 to 19 says, "Remember ye not the former things, neither consider the things of old. Behold, I will do a new thing. Now it shall spring forth, shall ye not know it? I will even make a way in the wilderness, and rivers in the desert." Hear that carefully. God is not asking you to forget what happened to you. He is asking you to stop consulting it for information about what happens next. The former things do not get a vote in your future anymore. If your eyes cannot yet see the shift clearly, that is not a problem. Your spirit already knows something has moved. There is a difference between a season pausing to catch its breath and a season actually closing, and what you are sensing right now is the second one. The chapter did not go on break. It ended. Congratulations does not usually accompany the word ending. But this ending deserves it, because it marks something you fought hard to survive, something you were never guaranteed to make it through. And yet here you are, still standing, still listening, still willing to believe that something better might actually be true. Over the sections ahead, we are going to walk through exactly what this ending means, what it does not mean, and what is actually beginning to take its place. Stay with me. What God finishes, He does not reopen. Before we go further, if something in you already knows this season is done, type "It is finished" in the comments below. Let it be your declaration, not just words on a screen. And if you want to keep walking through messages like this one, go ahead and subscribe now, so you do not miss what is coming next. 1. The season that tried to break you has ended. There is a kind of ending that only becomes visible in hindsight, the way you sometimes realize a storm has passed only once you notice the quiet afterward, rather than the moment it actually stopped. That is where you are standing right now, even if you have not fully recognized it yet. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 1 says, "To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven." Seasons, by definition, are not permanent. They have edges, they end. The season that tried to convince you it would last forever was never actually built to last forever, but only felt that way because you were living inside it without being able to see where it stopped. Part of what made that season feel endless was the way it distorted your sense of time itself. Difficult seasons have a way of stretching every week into what feels like a month, every setback into confirmation that nothing will ever change. That distortion was never an accurate measurement. It was simply what prolonged pain does to perception. Now that the season has actually ended, you may find yourself surprised at how much shorter it looks in hindsight than it felt while you were living through it. Your shoulders have started sitting an inch lower these days, and you did not have to think about it to get there. You may notice something similar in yourself lately, a habit of bracing for bad news that no longer gets triggered the way it used to, a moment where you expected the old dread to show up, and it simply did not arrive. 2 Corinthians 5 verse 17 declares, "Therefore if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new." This is not poetic exaggeration meant to comfort you from a safe distance. It is a description of something already true in the spirit, even in the places where your circumstances have not fully caught up yet. Here is what makes this different from every other time you told yourself it was finally over. This time, the ending did not come from your own willpower running out the clock. It came from God closing a door you could not have closed on your own, no matter how hard you tried. That distinction matters. Willpower fades. What God closes stays closed. There is also a difference worth naming between an ending you engineered and an ending God authored. Endings you force through sheer effort tend to require constant maintenance, a daily act of will to keep the door shut against the temptation to reopen it. Endings God authors do not require that kind of exhausting vigilance. They simply hold the way a foundation holds a building without needing to be reinforced every morning before anyone else wakes up. A practical way to steward this truth this week. The next time an old fear tries to reintroduce itself, do not argue with it using the same tired reasoning you have used before. Simply say out loud if you need to that the season it belongs to is over. You are not required to relive a chapter God has already finished writing. 2. God was never absent from your pain. One of the cruelest lies that pain tells is that it happened alone, unseen, unrecorded, as though your suffering existed outside of anyone's notice, including God's. That lie deserves to be confronted directly because it is not true, and it never was. Psalm 34 verse 18 says, "The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit." Nigh means near, not eventually near. Not near once you cleaned yourself up enough to deserve his attention. Near during the actual breaking. God does not wait outside the room where your heart is falling apart. He is already inside it. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from crying in places built for privacy rather than comfort. A car in a parking lot, a bathroom with the shower running to cover the sound, a hallway at 2 in the morning. None of those rooms were ever truly empty. What felt like isolation was, in fact, one of the most attended moments of your life, even though the attendance was invisible to you at the time. Deuteronomy 31 verse 6 offers a promise that does not soften the difficulty of the past, but does answer the loneliness of it. He will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. Not failing and not forsaking are two different assurances. Failing would mean God tried and came up short. Forsaking would mean he simply left. Neither happened. He was present the entire time, even in the specific moments you assumed he was not. It is worth sitting honestly with why that presence felt so undetectable at the time. Pain has a way of narrowing perception until almost nothing outside the immediate suffering registers clearly, including comfort that may have been arriving in forms you were simply too overwhelmed to recognize. A meal someone brought without being asked. A song that arrived at exactly the right moment. A stranger's unexpected kindness on an otherwise unbearable day. None of that was coincidence. It was frequently God working through ordinary means you were not yet able to trace back to him. Isaiah 41 verse 10 goes further, naming exactly what that presence was doing. "Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed. For I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness." Strengthening, helping, upholding. Those are not passive verbs. They describe active involvement during the exact seasons that felt the most abandoned. A bathroom fan left running long after the shower has ended, just enough noise to cover the sound of crying, is a detail no one else was ever meant to see. Think of the seasons behind you the same way. There were quiet markers of God's involvement the entire time, even if you only recognize them now, looking back at a season that finally has an ending attached to it. If you have been carrying resentment toward God for what felt like silence during your hardest years, bring that honestly into prayer rather than suppressing it. Ask him directly to show you where he was, even in the memory that still hurts the most to revisit. He is not afraid of that question, and he is not going to be caught without an answer. It may help to remember that silence and absence are not the same thing. A parent sitting quietly beside a child's hospital bed through the night is not absent simply because they are not speaking. Sometimes presence looks like staying rather than explaining, holding rather than fixing, remaining rather than announcing itself. God's silence during your hardest season was very often that kind of presence, the kind that does not need to narrate itself to be real. 3. The weight is lifting and fear is losing its grip. Fear rarely leaves all at once. It tends to loosen the way a held breath finally releases, not with a single dramatic exhale, but in stages you almost do not notice until you realize your shoulders have been lower for days. 2 Timothy 1 verse 7 says plainly, "For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." Notice what fear is not on that list. It was never something God handed you to carry. It arrived from somewhere else, attached itself during the hardest years, and convinced you it belonged to your personality rather than to your circumstances. It did not belong to you. It was simply loud for a season. This distinction matters because it changes how you relate to fear going forward. A permanent character trait requires acceptance. A season-specific intruder requires eviction. If fear has felt like an unchangeable part of who you are, consider the possibility that you have simply been misclassifying a temporary tenant as a permanent resident. What God gave you was power, love, and a sound mind. Everything else was borrowed weight from a season that has already ended. Your phone buzzes now, and for the first time in a long while, your stomach does not drop before you even glance at the screen. Something similar happens in a healed spirit. The old triggers remain in the environment. What changes is your body's willingness to brace against them. Psalm 55 verse 22 instructs, "Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. He shall never suffer the righteous to be moved." Casting is an active motion, not a passive hope that weight will eventually evaporate on its own. It requires actually setting the burden down somewhere, specifically into God's hands, rather than continuing to carry it out of sheer habit. There is a reason this verse uses the word cast rather than a gentler word like release or let go. Casting implies real effort, a deliberate throw rather than a soft, passive unclenching. Some burdens are heavy enough that setting them down does require genuine intention, even a bit of force, especially after your hands have grown so accustomed to their weight that emptiness itself feels unfamiliar. Give yourself permission for that casting to require actual effort. It does not mean your faith is weak. It simply means the burden was real. This is worth naming honestly. Sometimes fear lingers not because God has not lifted it, but because your hands have grown so used to holding something heavy that they do not immediately recognize the freedom of being empty. If that describes you, practice noticing several times a day this week, whenever your body tenses in anticipation of a threat that never actually arrives. Ask yourself plainly whether that tension still belongs to your present, or whether it is simply an old reflex from a season that has already ended. Give this process time without judging its pace. Fear that took years to build rarely dissolves in a single prayer, and that is not a sign of weak faith. It is simply how nervous systems and spirits both work, gradually unlearning what took a long time to learn in the first place. Patience with your own healing timeline is not the opposite of trust. It is often exactly what trust looks like in practice. 4. Your scars are testimonies, not chains. There is a meaningful difference between carrying a memory and being controlled by one. Memory means you remember what happened. Control means what happened is still making decisions for you. Healing does not erase the memory. It breaks the control. Revelation 12 verse 11 describes exactly how that shift happens. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. Notice that the testimony itself carries overcoming power, not the absence of a difficult past, but the honest telling of it. What you survived, once it stops being a source of shame, becomes something entirely different. Proof, both to yourself and to anyone else who needs to hear it, that the worst season did not get the final word. There is a specific kind of authority that only comes from having actually walked through something rather than simply having studied it from a safe distance. Someone who has genuinely survived a particular kind of pain carries a credibility that cannot be manufactured through preparation alone. That is precisely why the enemy works so hard to keep survivors silent, ashamed of the very experience that would otherwise become one of their most useful tools for helping others. A scar you stopped covering with long sleeves says more than any explanation ever could. Some of what you carried through your hardest season was fragile too. It made it through regardless. 2 Corinthians 1 verse 4 explains the actual purpose behind the comfort you eventually received. It was never meant to end with you personally. It was given so you could comfort others facing what you have already survived, using the exact comfort you were given. Pain that stays private accomplishes nothing beyond your own healing. Pain that gets spoken honestly becomes a resource of someone still trapped in it. This does not mean every survivor is required to become a public speaker or build a platform around their story. A comfort can be passed forward in a single quiet conversation just as powerfully as it can through a stage or a book. What matters is willingness, not visibility. The friend who simply says, quietly and without performance, that they understand because they have been there too, is often doing exactly what this verse describes, even if no one else ever hears about it. Philippians 3 verse 13 to 14 gives the posture that keeps a testimony from calcifying into an identity, forgetting those things which are behind, and reaching forth unto those things which are before, I press toward the mark. Forgetting here does not mean erasing. It means releasing the grip the past used to have on your forward motion. You are allowed to remember what happened without organizing your entire future around it. A practical step this week. Think of one person who might genuinely need to hear a single honest sentence about what you walked through and how God met you there. You do not need the whole story polished. One true sentence, offered honestly, often does more than an entire rehearsed testimony ever could. There is no required timeline for when a scar becomes ready to be shared. Some testimonies are meant to be spoken within months of the healing. Others need years before the telling feels steady rather than raw. Neither timeline is wrong. What matters is that when you do share it, you share it because it might genuinely help someone else, not because you feel pressured to prove your healing to anyone watching. 5. Trust is becoming your new foundation. Trust that has been broken does not usually return the way it left, all at once, fully formed. It tends to return the way weight returns to an ankle after an injury, cautiously, testing the ground before committing full pressure to it. That caution is not weakness, it is wisdom learning to walk again. Proverbs 3 verse 5 to 6 offers the clearest instruction available for exactly this stage. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Notice this is not a demand for blind certainty. It is an invitation to lean, which implies weight shifting gradually rather than all at once. Leaning also implies something else worth noticing. You do not have to fully release your own weight all at once to begin trusting again. You can lean partially while still testing the ground, gradually transferring more weight as the foundation proves itself trustworthy through repeated experience. God does not require an all-or-nothing commitment before he begins meeting you in the process. He simply asks that the leaning continue rather than stop entirely out of fear. You may notice that trusting God again does not feel like the confident, unshakable faith you imagined it would feel like once healing arrived. It might feel smaller than that, quieter, more like a decision renewed each morning than a permanent feeling installed once and never questioned again. That is not a lesser form of trust. It is simply what mature trust actually looks like once it has survived real damage and chosen to rebuild anyway. Psalm 56 verse 3 gives permission for the moments when trust and fear show up in the same breath. What time I am afraid, I will trust in thee. Notice the order. Fear is acknowledged first, honestly, without pretending it has already been resolved. Trust follows it anyway. You do not need to wait until fear disappears completely before you are qualified to trust again. That sequence, fear first and trust following, is worth remembering the next time you feel disqualified from faith, simply because fear showed up before it did. The verse does not describe fear and trust as opposites competing for the same space. It describes them coexisting, with trust ultimately having the final word even while fear is still speaking. This week, notice one specific area where you have been quietly managing outcomes yourself, rather than actually releasing them to God, whether that is a relationship, a financial decision, or a health concern you have been carrying alone. Name it honestly in prayer and practice releasing it again the next time it resurfaces, even if you have released it before. A trust rebuilt after real damage is rarely a single event. It is a practice repeated until it becomes familiar again. Do not measure your progress by comparing yourself to who you were before the damage happened, as though the goal is simply returning to an earlier version of your faith. The trust forming in you now is not a restoration of what was lost. It is something new, built with a maturity the earlier version of your faith did not yet have, because it has now survived something the earlier version never had to face. 6. Joy is returning in the ordinary moments. Joy after a long season of hardship rarely announces itself with fanfare. It tends to arrive quietly, in moments too small to photograph, easy to miss if you are still scanning your life for the next disaster instead of noticing what has already changed. Psalm 30 verse 5 promises this kind of return. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Morning in this verse is not necessarily a single dramatic sunrise. Sometimes it is a slow, gradual lightening that you only notice once you compare how heavy things used to feel against how they feel now. Consider how genuinely difficult it can be to notice gradual change while you are living inside it. A person who slowly regains strength after an illness rarely notices the exact day they became stronger. They notice it in hindsight, comparing an ordinary task from last month to how effortless it feels this month. Joy tends to return the same way, more visible in retrospective comparison than in any single dramatic moment you could point to and call the turning point. You catch yourself humming along to a song before you even notice you have started. Watch for versions of that shift in your own life this week, moments where you find yourself simply present, unguarded, not performing calm, but actually feeling it. Nehemiah 8 verse 10 makes a claim worth remembering specifically during a season of rebuilding. The joy of the Lord is your strength. Not simply a pleasant feeling layered on top of your circumstances, but an actual source of strength, meaning joy does not have to wait until every difficulty is fully resolved before it becomes available to you. This verse was spoken to a people rebuilding a broken city, not to a people who had already finished rebuilding and were simply celebrating the result. Joy in that context was not a reward for completed work. It was fuel for work still in progress. If your own rebuilding still feels unfinished in places, that does not disqualify you from joy right now. It may actually be exactly what strengthens you enough to keep rebuilding. If joy still feels unfamiliar or even slightly suspicious after everything you have walked through, that reaction makes sense and does not need to be rushed past. Give yourself permission to notice small moments of lightness without immediately searching for the catch. Practice staying in a good moment a little longer than instinct tells you is safe. Joy that has been absent for a long season sometimes needs active welcome before it feels natural to receive again. There is a particular kind of guilt that sometimes accompanies returning joy, a quiet worry that feeling good again also dishonors how hard the previous season actually was. That guilt is not required, and it is not honoring anyone by keeping you tethered to heaviness that has already served its purpose. Healing that refuses joy is not more sincere. It is simply healing that has not yet fully arrived. A quiet purpose is taking shape within you. Purpose rarely arrives with a headline. Far more often, it arrives the way morning light enters a room, gradually, without a specific moment you can point to and say that is when it started. You may already be noticing early signs of this, even if you have not named it yet. Jeremiah 29 verse 11 offers the promise that anchors this stage. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace, and not of evil, to give you an expected end. That expected end was never contingent on your past staying spotless. It was planned around exactly the story you actually have, including the parts that once felt disqualifying. This is precisely where many people quietly disqualify themselves before God ever has the chance to. They assume purpose is reserved for people whose stories look cleaner, whose pasts contain fewer complications, whose testimonies would translate more easily into a polished presentation. But the plans described in this verse were never conditioned on a spotless resume. They were formed around exactly who you are, including everything you once assumed made you unlikely to be used. The same name has started surfacing in your prayers before anyone ever asked you to pray for them. Purpose forming in you may look similarly undramatic, less like a grand new plan and more like a quiet pull you cannot quite explain but keep noticing anyway. Psalm 138 verse 8 offers reassurance for the specific fear that purpose might stall out halfway. The Lord will perfect that which concerneth me. Perfecting here does not mean flawless. It means completed, carried all the way through rather than abandoned partway once the initial excitement fades. This promise matters especially for anyone who has previously started meaningful things and watched them fall apart before completion, whether through circumstance, discouragement, or simply losing momentum along the way. Those unfinished chapters do not disqualify you from a completed purpose now. God is not intimidated by your track record of incomplete attempts. He is the one making the completion possible this time, which means the outcome no longer depends solely on your own consistency holding steady the entire way through. You do not need the entire purpose mapped out before you take the next step available to you. Most people who eventually walk in a clear sense of calling did not begin with the whole picture. They began by responding honestly to whatever was directly in front of them, one obedience at a time. This week, notice what consistently draws your attention, what kind of need or person or situation you find yourself thinking about, even when nothing requires you to. That recurring pull is rarely random. It is frequently the first outline of something forming. Resist comparing the shape of your emerging purpose to someone else's more visible calling. Not every purpose looks like a platform or a public role. Some of the most significant purposes unfold quietly in a single household, a single friendship, a single act of consistent faithfulness that never makes it onto anyone's highlight reel, but matters enormously to the specific people it touches. 8. This is your season of rest and restoration. There is a specific kind of tired that only years of survival mode can produce. The exhaustion of having held everything together for so long that rest itself starts to feel unfamiliar, even slightly unsafe. If that describes where you have been living, hear this clearly. That particular exhaustion was never meant to be permanent. Matthew 11 verse 28 to 30 extends an invitation that was never reserved for people who had already figured everything out. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Rest here is not a reward waiting at the end of enough effort. It is offered directly to the exhausted, in the middle of their exhaustion, without a performance requirement attached. Notice that Jesus does not say the yoke disappears entirely. He says it becomes easy, and the burden becomes light, which suggests partnership rather than complete removal of responsibility. You are not being asked to do nothing. You are being invited into carrying life alongside someone whose strength does not run out the way yours eventually does. That distinction matters, especially for anyone whose exhaustion came from believing they had to carry everything entirely alone. You fall asleep some nights now before finishing the mental list of everything that could go wrong. Watch for that same kind of settling in your own daily rhythms, places where vigilance is finally allowed to relax because the threat it was guarding against has genuinely passed. Joel 2 verse 25 makes a promise that specifically addresses the years that felt wasted. I will restore to you the years that the locust hath eaten. Restoration in this verse is not vague comfort. It is specific, addressing actual lost time with the confidence that God is capable of returning value to seasons that once felt like pure loss. Psalm 23 verse 1-3 completes the picture with unusual gentleness. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. A shepherd does not simply provide food and then disappear. He leads toward rest deliberately, understanding that a flock running on empty cannot be led anywhere useful until it has actually been restored first. This week, identify one specific way you have been operating in survival mode long after the actual danger passed, and take one deliberate step toward rest in that specific area, whether that means an earlier bedtime, an honest conversation you have been avoiding, or simply permission to stop monitoring something that no longer requires constant vigilance. Rest is not the reward for finishing the work. Sometimes it is the very thing that makes the next season of work sustainable at all. Restoration, like healing, rarely arrives instantly and completely. It tends to arrive in layers, the way color slowly returns to a room once light finally reaches every corner, rather than just the parts nearest the window. Do not be discouraged if some areas of your life feel fully restored, while others still feel like they are catching up. That unevenness is normal. It does not mean the restoration is incomplete. It simply means it is still in progress, exactly as it should be. You have walked through every layer of what this season's ending actually means, and now there is only one thing left to do with it. Believe it enough to live differently because of it. Isaiah 61 verse 3 describes exactly what God specializes in doing with what was broken. Giving beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. That exchange was never theoretical. It has already been happening in you throughout everything we have walked through together in this message. Revelation 21 verse 5 carries the final, settled promise worth closing on. Behold, I make all things new, not eventually in some distant future disconnected from your actual life. Now, in the exact season you are currently standing in, with the exact story you actually have. Notice the specific word used in that verse. Not replace, as though your story is being discarded and swapped for someone else's. Make new, which means the same story, the same person, the same history, transformed rather than erased. God is not asking you to become someone unrecognizable. He is making the person you already are new from the inside, carrying forward everything that survived, while releasing everything that no longer belongs. The season that tried to define you has ended. It is not on pause, and it is not circling back around to find you again. What God closes stays closed, and what God opens carries His full intention behind it. You do not have to brace for the old pattern to return, because it was never simply interrupted. It was finished. Wherever you are as you hear this, whether you already sense this ending before this message named it, or these words are the first time you have let yourself believe it might actually be true, know that neither timing disqualifies you from what comes next. God does not measure your readiness by how quickly you caught up to what He already knew. He simply meets you exactly where you are and moves forward from there. Before we close, I want to invite you to pause with me here and bring everything we have walked through into a moment of honest prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for staying present through every season we assumed we were surviving alone. Thank you for closing what needed to be closed fully without leaving a door open for the old pain to return uninvited. Heal what still aches when we remember. Where fear still tries to reintroduce itself as though nothing has changed, remind us plainly that its season has ended. Where trust still feels fragile, meet us in that fragility rather than demanding certainty we do not yet feel. Lord, thank you for not rushing our healing and for staying patient with every layer it has taken to bring us here. Continue that same patience in whatever layers still remain, and let us trust the process even when we cannot yet see its full shape. Restore what the difficult years took from us, not only in circumstance but in confidence, in joy, in our willingness to hope again without flinching. Teach us to rest without guilt and to receive joy without suspicion, even in the smallest, most ordinary moments of our days. Where we have carried resentment toward you for the silence we misunderstood, forgive us gently and show us plainly where you actually were. Where old fear tries to reintroduce itself as though nothing has changed, remind us clearly that its season is over and will not be reopened. God, give us courage to speak our testimony honestly when someone needs to hear it, and give us patience with the parts of our purpose that are still quietly forming. We do not need the whole picture today. We simply need to keep walking faithfully with what you have already shown us. Seal this ending as completely as you intend it to be. Let us walk forward without looking over our shoulder for what you have already put behind us. In Jesus' name, amen. If this word brought you comfort, I would love for you to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to know that their hardest season truly is behind them. You never know who has been quietly waiting for someone to finally say it out loud. Thank you for walking through this with me. Go in peace and go without looking back. May the God who finished this season in you carry you gently and steadily into everything he has already prepared next.